The mansion stood tall on the edge of the city, surrounded by shining cars, trimmed gardens, and marble floors that seemed to reflect every beam of sunlight. Inside, everything looked perfect, expensive, and cold. The man who owned it, Mr. Harrison, was one of those people who had everything money could buy, but even though he lived in luxury, his heart had grown distant from kindness. People respected him for his wealth but feared him for his pride. That morning, the mansion was full of noise. Servants rushed through the halls, polishing tables, setting up decorations, and preparing for the big party that would take place that evening. Mr. Harrison was hosting one of his grand gatherings again, a place where other rich businessmen and their families came to drink, gossip, and show off. For him, it was not about celebration. It was about showing power. Among the busy workers was a young woman named Lena. She moved quietly, careful not to drop or damage anything. Her uniform was neat but old, and her hands were rough from years of work. She had joined the mansion staff only a few months ago after losing both of her parents. Life had not been kind to her. But no matter how hard things became, she never stopped believing in hard work and honesty. Lena didn't speak much. She was polite, respectful, and kept her head down whenever Mr. Harrison passed by. She knew his reputation. He didn't like mistakes. If a glass was misplaced or if the tablecloth wasn't perfectly straight, he would scold whoever was nearby, even if it wasn't their fault. Most of the servants feared him, but Lena just tried to stay out of trouble. As the sun began to set, guests started arriving in shiny black cars. Laughter filled the hall as women in glittering dresses and men in suits entered with glasses of wine. The chandeliers sparkled, and the sound of classical music played softly in the background. Everyone looked happy, but it wasn't the kind of happiness that comes from the heart. It was the kind that comes from showing off. Lena was moving around the room, serving drinks and picking up empty glasses. She kept her eyes low, not wanting to draw attention, but Mr. Harrison noticed her anyway. He had seen her a few times before, always quiet, always serious. Something about her calmness made him curious. To him, people like her were invisible, just background figures who kept things running. Yet tonight he found himself watching her as she carefully avoided the loud crowd. He turned to his friends who were standing near the grand piano in the corner of the room. The piano was old but beautiful, made of dark polished wood. It hadn't been played in years. One of his guests laughed, pointing at it. "You still keep that thing?" "I thought you didn't care about music anymore." Mr. Harrison smirked. "It's just decoration now," he said. "Music doesn't make money." Everyone laughed at his comment, raising their glasses. But as the laughter died down, he noticed Lena again. She was dusting a nearby table, her movements careful and precise. For some reason, he decided to make her the target of the evening's amusement. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was his arrogance, but he wanted to see what would happen if he put her on the spot. He called out loudly, "You there?" Lena froze, the duster still in her hand. The guests turned their heads, curious. She looked up, unsure if he was speaking to her. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "Come here," Mr. Harrison ordered. She walked slowly toward him, her heart beating fast. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. The guests whispered among themselves, wondering what he wanted with the maid. Mr. Harrison pointed to the piano. "Do you know what that is?" he asked, his tone mocking. Lena looked at it and nodded. "It's a piano, sir." "Ah, so you do know." He smiled coldly. "Tell me, have you ever played it before? Or is that too much for someone like you?" A few people chuckled quietly, covering their mouths. Lena's face turned red, but she stayed calm. "I've played before," she said quietly. That caught his attention. "You have? Interesting. Then why don't you show us what you can do?" The guests began whispering more loudly now. Some looked excited, others awkward. They weren't sure if this was going to be entertaining or cruel. Lena hesitated. She hadn't played in years, not since her mother passed away. Back then, their small apartment had an old borrowed keyboard, and her mother used to teach her songs when life was still warm and full of hope. But now everything had changed. The piano had become a distant memory buried under the struggles of survival. "Sir, I don't think I should," Lena said softly, her voice almost trembling. Mr. Harrison laughed. "Why not? Are you afraid? It's just a piano. You said you can play. Let's hear it." She looked around. Everyone was watching her. If she refused, it would make things worse. The other maids stood in the corner, their eyes filled with sympathy. One of them shook her head slightly, trying to warn her not to do it, but Lena didn't see. Her heart was beating so fast she could barely think. Mr. Harrison clapped his hands once. "Come on then, sit down. Play something, anything." The room grew quieter. Lena walked toward the piano slowly, her hands cold. She could hear faint laughter behind her, but she tried to block it out. She sat on the small bench, staring at the black and white keys. Her reflection appeared faintly on the polished surface. A tired face, weary eyes, and a faint scar near her wrist from years of cleaning work. She rested her fingers on the keys, but they didn't move. Her mind went blank. She hadn't touched an instrument in so long that she was afraid she might make a fool of herself. Then, like a soft whisper, a memory surfaced. She was 7 years old again, sitting beside her mother on a wobbly stool. The little keyboard had missing keys, but her mother smiled anyway. "Don't worry about mistakes," she used to say. "Music isn't about perfection. It's about feeling." Her throat tightened. That memory alone gave her strength. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. A soft note filled the room. It was faint, shaky, but pure. Then another note. And another. The guests grew silent. Something about the sound made them stop whispering. Mr. Harrison stood with his drink, smirking at first, but as the melody began to build, the smile slowly faded from his face. Lena's fingers started to move more confidently. She wasn't just playing the piano, she was speaking through it. The music told her story without words, her pain, her loss, her quiet strength. The laughter that once filled the room disappeared. The guests watched, unable to look away. The sound of her playing carried emotions none of them expected to hear that night. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence. Lena sat still, her hands resting on the keys, not daring to look up. Her heart was racing. She didn't know whether they would laugh or clap. Then someone whispered, "That was beautiful." Mr. Harrison's hand, still holding the glass, lowered slowly. He didn't speak. His face was unreadable, caught between surprise and something he couldn't quite name. Maybe guilt, maybe shame. But before anyone could react further, Lena stood up quickly, bowed slightly, and hurried away toward the kitchen. The other servants watched her as she passed, their eyes wide. No one said a word. The silence in the hall was unlike anything that Mansion had ever felt before. Mr. Harrison turned back toward the piano, his reflection visible on its shiny surface. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the most powerful person in the room. In the quiet corner of the kitchen, Lena leaned against the wall, her hands still trembling. She didn't know what had just happened. All she knew was that something had changed, not in the room, but inside her. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly, hearing her mother's voice again in her heart. "Never let anyone make you feel small." She took a deep breath and returned to her work, unaware that this night would become the turning point of her life, and would soon change the heart of the man who once tried to humiliate her. The night after the party, the mansion felt strangely quiet. The laughter, the noise, and the clinking of glasses had all faded away, leaving behind a heavy stillness. The only sound came from the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Lena was still awake, sitting on the edge of her small bed in the servants' quarters. Her fingers rested on her lap, still trembling slightly from what had happened earlier. She couldn't stop thinking about the piano, the music, and the way everyone had looked at her after she played. It all felt like a dream, something too unreal to have happened in a place like that. For years she had hidden that part of herself, the part that loved music, the part that remembered her mother's songs. She had pushed it deep inside, buried it under the weight of work and survival. But tonight, when her fingers touched the piano keys again, it was as if the past came alive. It brought both comfort and pain. She hadn't meant to move anyone. She just wanted to escape the laughter and humiliation, even for a moment. But something about that moment had changed the air in the room. In another part of the mansion, Mr. Harrison sat in his study, the glow of the lamp falling softly over his desk. He wasn't reading or working like he usually did after parties. Instead, he sat there quietly, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. The sound of Lena's piano playing still echoed faintly in his mind. He didn't understand why it affected him. It was just music. A maid had played a few notes and everyone had gone silent. Yet something about it had shaken him deeply. It had been years since he'd heard music that real, that full of feeling, He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. The truth was, long before he became the proud and distant man he was now, he had once been a boy who loved music too. His late mother had played piano in their small home back when life was simple. But as he grew older, his world changed. Money, success, and ambition replaced everything else. Somewhere along the way, the sound of a piano stopped meaning anything to him, until tonight. The next morning, the servants began their usual routine. Lena, tired from a sleepless night, went back to cleaning the dining area. She tried to act normal, but she could feel the other maids glancing at her. Some smiled softly as if proud of her courage. Others seemed worried. No one had ever stood in front of the guests like that before. But Lena didn't see herself as brave. She had only done what she had to. When Mr. Harrison entered the room, everyone quickly lowered their heads and continued working. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked past them and poured himself a cup of coffee. But before leaving, his eyes rested briefly on Lena. She pretended not to notice, though her heart jumped. For a moment, their eyes almost met, but he turned away just as quickly. It was a small, strange moment that left her even more confused. That day passed slower than usual. The mansion was quiet again, with only a few visitors coming and going. In the afternoon, Lena went to dust the main hall where the grand piano still stood near the window. Sunlight poured over it, making its dark surface shine. She hesitated before going near it. Her fingers brushed the top lightly, and a faint smile appeared on her face. It reminded her of the moment she played, the feeling of losing herself in music again. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "You play beautifully." She turned quickly, her heart jumping. It was Mr. Harrison. He stood at the doorway, watching her. His expression was calm, not like the one he had last night. There was no trace of mockery this time. He stepped closer, placing his hands behind his back. "I didn't expect that," he said quietly. "When I asked you to play, I thought you'd be nervous and make a fool of yourself." Lena looked down. "I almost did, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "Almost." "But you didn't." She didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them for a few seconds. Finally, he asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother taught me," she replied softly. "When I was a child, we had a small keyboard at home. She loved music, even though we couldn't afford much. I just learned by watching her." He nodded slowly. Something in his eyes softened. "Your mother must have been a good woman." "She was," Lena said, smiling faintly. "She used to say that music is the language of the heart. No matter how poor we were, she made sure there was always music in the house." Mr. Harrison didn't say anything for a while. He looked at the piano, then back at her. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "It's strange. I haven't felt anything while listening to music for years. But when you played last night, it was different." Lena blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He gave a short nod and turned to leave. But before walking away, he said, "You can practice here sometimes if you want, just not during working hours." Then he left the hall, leaving Lena speechless. She stood there for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. Did he really mean it? Could she really play again freely, even for a little while? Her hands trembled with both fear and excitement. That night, when everyone had gone to their rooms, she returned to the piano. The hall was dark except for a small lamp near the corner. She sat down and touched the keys again. The sound was soft, comforting. She played quietly, not to impress anyone this time, but for herself. Each note carried her mother's memory, her struggles, and her dreams. It was her way of keeping hope alive. Over the next few days, the mansion felt different. Mr. Harrison didn't speak much, but something in his behavior had changed. He wasn't as harsh as before. The staff noticed but didn't understand why. Whenever Lena passed by, he didn't scold or insult her anymore. Once, he even asked one of the maids to make sure she had her meals on time, which surprised everyone. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, Lena noticed an old photograph on the desk. It was of a young boy sitting beside a piano, smiling next to a woman who looked proud and gentle. It didn't take long for her to realize it was Mr. Harrison as a child with his mother. She felt a sudden warmth in her heart. Maybe music had once meant something to him too. That evening, she heard footsteps behind her as she wiped the shelves. It was him again. "You found the picture, didn't you?" he asked with a faint smile. Lena hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to pry." He shook his head. "It's all right. That was my mother. She used to play every evening. Our house wasn't big, but when she played, it felt like the whole world stopped. His eyes grew distant, lost in memory. I used to sit next to her and dream that one day I'd make her proud. What happened to her? Lena asked softly. She passed away when I was still young, he said quietly. After that, I stopped playing. Life became about business, money, and success. I thought that was what mattered most. But last night when you played, I remembered her again. It felt like she was in the room. Lena smiled gently. Music has that power, sir. It brings back what we think we've lost. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. You're right. From that day on, he often passed by the hall just to listen when Lena practiced. He never said anything, just stood quietly at a distance. Sometimes, when she stopped playing, he would leave before she could see him. It was as if he didn't want her to know he was listening, but she knew. And every time she played not just for herself, but for him too. For the broken man who had forgotten what it meant to feel. Slowly, their silent bond grew. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, began to feel different. The servants whispered that something had changed in their employer. He smiled more, shouted less, and even started greeting them politely. They didn't know what had caused it, but Lena did. One evening, as the sunset painted the room golden, Mr. Harrison walked in while Lena was finishing a song. She stood up quickly, embarrassed, but he gestured for her to continue. Don't stop, he said quietly. She hesitated, then sat again and played. He listened, eyes closed as the melody filled the air. When she finished, he said, You play as if you're telling a story. She smiled shyly. Maybe I am, sir. He nodded slowly. And it's a story worth hearing. That night, as she returned to her small room, Lena felt a strange warmth in her heart. Something inside her told her that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She didn't know it, but the man who once humiliated her was beginning to see her as someone who had awakened a part of his soul he thought was gone forever. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion slowly began to feel alive again. The cold air that once filled its hall seemed warmer now, carrying with it the sound of gentle piano music. Every evening, when the chores were done and the lights dimmed, Lena would quietly sit by the grand piano and play. Sometimes soft tunes that sounded like a whisper, sometimes melodies full of life and hope. She never did it to impress anyone. She simply played because it made her feel human again. Mr. Harrison often found himself drawn to that sound. At first, he listened from afar, standing by the doorway so she wouldn't notice. But one night, he decided to sit quietly near the window and let the music wash over him. It reminded him of simpler times, back when his life wasn't filled with contracts, deadlines, and competition. He could almost see his mother's hands moving on the piano, the way she used to smile after finishing a song. That memory brought both warmth and pain. Lena, though aware that someone might be listening, didn't mind. She poured her heart into each note. Sometimes she played songs she remembered from her childhood. Other times she made up new melodies from feelings she couldn't express in words. The piano had become her voice, her safe space in a world that often ignored people like her. One evening, as she was cleaning the dining hall, Mr. Harrison entered with a group of guests. They were business partners from another city, dressed in sharp suits, their laughter echoing through the room. Lena quietly stepped aside, holding a tray, but she could feel one of them staring at her. He whispered something to Mr. Harrison with a smirk. That your new maid? She looks too quiet for this place. Mr. Harrison frowned slightly but didn't respond. They sat down to discuss work, but the guest's tone stayed mocking. At one point, he noticed the piano and said, I remember you had a piano here last time I visited. Do you still play, or is it just decoration? Mr. Harrison forced a small smile. I don't play anymore, he said. But someone else does, the guest laughed. Oh, really? Who? Don't tell me it's your maid. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hoped he wouldn't mention her. But Mr. Harrison looked at her and then back at his guest. Actually, yes, he said calmly. She does. The men around the table chuckled. Come on, you can't be serious. You make your staff play for you now? Mr. Harrison's expression hardened. No, she plays because she can. And better than most people I know. The guest leaned back, still amused. Then let's hear her. Come on, I want to see this talent you're talking about. Lena froze. She didn't expect this. Mr. Harrison looked at her, his tone gentler now. Would you mind? For a moment she hesitated. The last time she played in front of people, It had started with mockery, too. But she saw something different in his eyes this time. Not pride, not arrogance, but trust. She nodded slowly and walked toward the piano. As she sat down, the room quieted. The guests leaned back in their chairs, ready to be entertained. But Lena didn't play to impress them. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play a tune that came from her heart. The melody rose softly, like a voice telling a story of sadness, hope, and strength. Every note seemed to carry emotion so real that the men who were once laughing now sat silently, their expressions softening. When she finished, there was no laughter, only quiet admiration. One of the guests finally spoke. "That was unexpected," he said softly. Mr. Harrison smiled faintly. "Talent doesn't ask for wealth," he replied. "It just exists." Lena stood up, bowed slightly, and quietly returned to her work. But inside she felt something shift. For the first time, she saw respect in the eyes of those who once looked down on her. That night, as she cleaned the last of the glasses, Mr. Harrison approached her. "You played beautifully again," he said. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I just played what I felt," he nodded. "That's what makes it real." He paused for a moment, then added, "There's going to be a charity event in the city next month. I'm sponsoring it. They usually hire professional performers, but—" He hesitated. "Would you consider playing there?" Lena looked at him, startled. "Me, at a public event?" "Yes, I think people should hear you." Her first instinct was to refuse. She was just a maid. What would people think? But the thought of playing on a real stage, something her mother once dreamed of, made her heart race. Still, she shook her head gently. "I don't think I'm ready for that, sir." "You are," he said simply. "Think about it." After he left, Lena stood there for a long time. The idea scared her, but it also filled her with a kind of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, she practiced in the evenings, perfecting every melody. Sometimes Mr. Harrison would sit nearby, offering quiet encouragement. He never interrupted or corrected her, he just listened. Once, when she made a mistake and sighed in frustration, he said softly, "Perfection isn't what moves people. Emotion does. Don't lose that." His words stayed with her. The night before the event, Lena could barely sleep. She stared at the ceiling, wondering if she was making a mistake. What if she embarrassed herself? What if people laughed at her again? But then she remembered her mother's voice. "Never let fear silence your gift." She closed her eyes and prayed for courage. The day of the event arrived. The city hall was decorated with lights and flowers. Wealthy families, businessmen, and socialites filled the seats. Lena stood backstage, her hands trembling. Mr. Harrison walked over to her, dressed in a black suit. "You'll be fine," he said calmly. She nodded nervously. "What if they don't like it?" he smiled. "Then play for yourself, not for them." Those simple words gave her strength. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. For a moment, she froze under the bright lights. The grand piano stood before her, shining under the spotlight. She took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. The first few notes were soft, uncertain. But then the rhythm found her. The melody flowed naturally, like a river finding its course. She forgot about the crowd, the stage, and her fears. She played from her heart, just as she had in the mansion that night. The hall grew silent. The sound of her music reached every corner, filling the air with something pure and real. When the final note ended, there was a long pause. Then suddenly the audience stood up and clapped. The applause was loud, sincere, and full of admiration. Lena couldn't believe it. Tears welled in her eyes as she stood and bowed. Somewhere in the front row she saw Mr. Harrison clapping too, a proud smile on his face. After the event, people came to meet her, asking where she had learned to play. She answered humbly, saying she had no teacher, just memories of her mother. Some even asked if she would consider performing again. It was all overwhelming, but in a good way. That night, back at the mansion, Lena sat by the piano again. Mr. Harrison walked in quietly. "You made everyone speechless tonight," he said. "Including me." She smiled softly. "I just did what you told me." "I played for myself," he nodded. "And that's why it worked." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You've reminded me that there are still things money can't buy, like sincerity and passion." Lena looked up at him. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us who we were before life made us forget." He smiled, his eyes softening. "You're wiser than you look." In the days that followed, things changed even more. Lena wasn't just the maid anymore. The other staff treated her with newfound respect, and Mr. Harrison began including her in conversations about upcoming events. But despite all the praise, she stayed humble. She still cleaned, still helped in the kitchen, still treated everyone kindly. Every evening when she played, the mansion seemed to glow with life. The walls that once echoed with emptiness now sang with music. Mr. Harrison, who once lived only for pride and wealth, found peace in the melodies that came from the heart of a simple girl who had nothing, but gave everything through her art. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives were now intertwined in ways that would continue to change both of them forever. What began as a cruel moment of humiliation had turned into a bond built on respect, humanity, and the healing power of music. The morning after the city event, Lena woke up feeling a strange mix of excitement and exhaustion. Her hands were sore from playing for hours, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had done something she never imagined possible, and for the first time, she felt recognized not just as a maid, but as a person with a voice, a story, and talent. As she moved quietly through the servants' quarters, she noticed the others smiling at her. Some whispered congratulations, while others just gave her nods of respect. Lena returned the gestures with a humble smile. She didn't need words. She had learned that actions spoke louder than applause. In the mansion, Mr. Harrison was awake early as always. He had spent the night thinking about the event, replaying the music in his mind. The sound of her piano had not only impressed the crowd, but it had stirred something deep within him. He had been proud of her, but more than that, he had felt a sense of humility he hadn't experienced in years. In all his life, surrounded by wealth and power, no one had ever reminded him of what truly mattered. Lena had. When he entered the dining hall for breakfast, Lena was already there, quietly preparing tea and toast for the staff. He watched her for a moment, noting the calmness in her demeanor. She had changed subtly but profoundly. Confidence radiated from her, yet she remained gentle and kind. He poured himself a cup of coffee and approached her. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he said softly. Lena looked up, surprised but pleased. "Thank you, sir. I was nervous, but I just focused on the music." "That's exactly it," he replied, nodding. "Music isn't about showing off. It's about letting yourself feel. And you did that better than anyone I've ever seen." She blushed, glancing down at her hands. "I just did what I love, sir. That's all." He smiled faintly and left the room, but Lena felt the weight of his words linger. For the first time, she realized that someone of his status genuinely recognized her abilities, her effort, and her humanity. The following days were filled with a different kind of rhythm. Lena continued her daily duties, but she also found moments to play the piano. Mr. Harrison allowed her more freedom to practice, often leaving her alone in the hall while he attended to his work. Sometimes he would sit quietly nearby, listening without saying a word. There was no longer an air of mockery, only respect and appreciation. The mansion, once a place of cold perfection, now resonated with life and warmth. One afternoon, a wealthy philanthropist visited the mansion. She had heard of the recent city event and was curious to meet the talented young woman who had captured everyone's attention. Lena greeted her politely, her usual modesty intact. The philanthropist complimented her playing, asking if she would consider performing at charitable gatherings regularly. Lena hesitated, unsure if she was ready for such a public role. But Mr. Harrison, standing nearby, encouraged her subtly with a nod. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "Don't be afraid to share it." That evening, Lena sat at the piano, the hall bathed in the soft glow of the chandelier. She practiced a new piece, one full of emotion and complexity. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, each note resonating with memories, dreams, and aspirations. Mr. Harrison entered quietly, sitting on a chair near the window. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The music itself communicated everything. As she played, she thought about her past, the struggles, the losses, the small moments of joy. Each note carried a fragment of her story, and for the first time she felt proud of it. She realized that the hardships she had endured were not weaknesses, but sources of strength that allowed her to express herself in ways that touched others. The sound of the piano seemed to linger longer than usual that night. When Lena finally stopped, she looked up to find Mr. Harrison standing closer than she expected. His expression was thoughtful, almost introspective. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. "And in some ways, you've changed me too." Lena was taken aback. "Me, sir?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "You reminded me that life isn't just about power, wealth, or control. It's about feeling, connecting, and remembering what really matters. I had forgotten that along the way." A warmth spread through Lena's chest. She had not intended to influence him, yet somehow her music had bridged the gap between their very different worlds. She realized that talent was not just about recognition, it was about touching hearts, even those that seemed unreachable. The days continued with a new energy. Mr. Harrison occasionally invited her to perform for small gatherings within the mansion. Friends and family members were impressed, often asking how a simple maid could play with such depth and grace. Lena remained humble, always attributing her skill to her mother's teachings and the love of music itself. But inside she knew she was growing, not just as a musician but as a person who had discovered her own worth. One rainy afternoon the mansion was unusually quiet. Lena sat at the piano playing a slow melancholic tune. The sound of raindrops against the windows complemented the music perfectly. She closed her eyes, letting the melody guide her. Mr. Harrison walked in silently, standing in the doorway, captivated. He didn't interrupt, didn't comment. He simply listened, letting the music fill the space between them. When the last note faded, he finally spoke. "That was remarkable. You make people feel what words cannot." Lena smiled softly, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known. "Music is the only way I can speak sometimes," she admitted. "It carries the feelings I can't put into words." He nodded. "And it speaks louder than any words ever could. You've reminded me that true beauty often comes from unexpected places." In the weeks that followed, Lena's reputation grew quietly. Word of her talent spread beyond the mansion, reaching circles she had never imagined. Invitations arrived for private performances, small recitals, and even teaching opportunities. She approached each one with careful consideration, never rushing into the spotlight, always maintaining her humility. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison began reflecting more on his life. He found himself less consumed by business, more open to kindness, and increasingly aware of the impact his actions had on others. His interactions with Lena had softened his perspective, showing him that wealth alone did not define success. It was the human connections, the moments of genuine emotion, and the acts of compassion that truly mattered. One evening, as Lena practiced, she noticed Mr. Harrison standing near the doorway with an unfamiliar expression, one of curiosity and anticipation. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "You've grown so much in such a short time. Have you ever considered taking music more seriously? Perhaps pursuing it beyond this mansion?" Lena paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. The thought had crossed her mind, but fear and doubt had always held her back. Yet now, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she felt a spark of courage. I've dreamed about it," she admitted softly, "but I never thought I had the chance." "You do now," he said firmly, "and I want to help. If you're willing, I can arrange lessons, performances, and opportunities for you to grow. I've never done this for anyone before, but I believe in you." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes. She had never expected such generosity, especially from someone who had once treated her as beneath him. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll try," he said gently. And so Lena agreed. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with possibilities, challenges, and growth. She continued her work in the mansion, but now, her days were intertwined with music, lessons, and the small joys of progress. Mr. Harrison watched quietly, proud and introspective, learning from the very person he had once tried to humiliate. The mansion, once a place of rigid rules and fear, now resonated with music, laughter, and human warmth. The piano had become a symbol of transformation, not just for Lena, but for everyone who experienced her gift. And as the days went by, it became clear that their lives, so different yet so connected, were forever changed by the simple act of courage, trust, and music from the heart. The weeks following Lena's decision to take her music seriously were filled with both excitement and nervous anticipation. Each morning she woke up with a mixture of eagerness and doubt. She was still a maid, still responsible for the chores and routines of the mansion, but now her days included lessons and practice sessions that pushed her to grow in ways she had never imagined. The piano became more than just a tool. It became a companion, a teacher, and a reflection of her own soul. Mr. Harrison, though still occupied with his business, made time to support her quietly. He arranged for a private tutor to come to the mansion, a retired pianist who had once performed in grand halls and concert stages. The tutor recognized Lena's raw talent immediately. "You have something special," he said during their first lesson. "Not everyone can play with feeling, but you play from the heart." Lena felt her confidence grow slowly. Each lesson brought new challenges, but also a sense of accomplishment. She learned to read music more precisely, to explore different styles, and to experiment with her own compositions. She wrote small pieces inspired by her life, her mother's teachings, her struggles, and the hope she carried within her. Each note felt like a piece of her story being shared with the world. One afternoon, while practicing a difficult piece, she felt frustration rise. Her fingers stumbled repeatedly, and she almost gave up. Mr. Harrison, who had been passing by the hall, paused and watched silently. He didn't interrupt, but his presence reminded her not to give up. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried again. This time her fingers moved smoothly, the melody flowing effortlessly. The sense of triumph was exhilarating, a reminder that perseverance could overcome fear. As Lena grew more skilled, word of her talent began to spread beyond the mansion. Invitations arrived from small music gatherings, private salons, and even local competitions. Mr. Harrison encouraged her to attend, emphasizing that exposure would help her grow and gain confidence. Lena was nervous but gradually accepted, seeing each opportunity as a chance to honor her mother's memory and her own passion. Her first small performance outside the mansion was in a local community hall. It was modest with a small audience, but Lena treated it with seriousness. She wore a simple dress, her hair neatly tied, and sat at the piano with her usual poise. As she played, she felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. The melody was delicate yet powerful, carrying the essence of her journey. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause. Tears filled her eyes as she bowed, overwhelmed by the recognition and the feeling that her music truly mattered. Returning to the mansion, Lena shared her experience with Mr. Harrison. "They really liked it," she said softly. "I didn't expect such a response." He smiled warmly. "They weren't responding to your clothes, your status, or anything else. They were responding to you. Your music spoke to them, and it will continue to do so." Days turned into months, and Lena's confidence grew with each performance. She became more comfortable with attention, understanding that her talent was not something to hide. Yet she remained humble, continuing her duties in the mansion and interacting kindly with everyone, from the head cook to the newest maids. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison observed a change within himself as well. Listening to Lena play, watching her grow, and witnessing the reactions of others had stirred something long dormant. He became less rigid, more empathetic, and increasingly aware of the impact of his actions on those around him. He began to treat the staff with greater respect and patience, and even his business decisions reflected a subtle shift toward fairness and humanity. One evening, after a long day, Lena was practicing a particularly challenging composition when Mr. Harrison approached her quietly. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "I remember when you first played in this mansion. That night changed everything, not just for you, but for me as well." Lena paused, looking at him with a gentle smile. "I didn't do it to change anyone, sir. I just wanted to play." He nodded thoughtfully. "And yet it did change things. It reminded me that talent, courage, and humility can come from the most unexpected places. You've shown me that life isn't only about control or wealth, but about connection, understanding, and appreciation for what truly matters." The bond between them had grown quietly over time, built on mutual respect and understanding. Mr. Harrison had once been the figure of authority and intimidation, but now, through Lena's music, he had learned humility and the value of genuine human connection. Lena, in turn, had discovered her own strength, courage, and the power of pursuing her dreams despite the obstacles. Soon, Lena began to participate in larger events, including charity concerts and cultural festivals. Each performance brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow and inspire others. Her music was no longer just a personal outlet. It had become a bridge, connecting her story with the hearts of those who listened. People began to recognize her not as a maid, but as a talented musician who carried authenticity and emotion in every note. One afternoon, after a particularly moving performance, Lena returned to the mansion to find a letter waiting for her. It was from a prestigious music academy, inviting her to apply for advanced training. The opportunity was immense, but it also meant leaving the only home she had known since arriving at the mansion. She felt torn. Her heart was full of excitement and fear, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to take such a step. Mr. Harrison noticed her hesitation and approached gently. "You've come so far," he said. "This is the chance you've been preparing for. You have the talent, the discipline, and the heart. You can do this." Lena looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I don't want to disappoint anyone, or leave what I've built here." "You won't disappoint anyone," he reassured her. "Your music is yours, and it will carry you wherever you go. And as for this place, it will always be here, and so will I, supporting you." After much reflection, Lena decided to accept the invitation. The thought of advancing her skills, performing on bigger stages, and honoring her mother's memory gave her courage. She spent her remaining days at the mansion practicing, performing for small gatherings, and saying goodbye to the staff who had become like a family. Each interaction reminded her of the journey she had taken, from a quiet, timid maid to a confident, gifted musician. On her last evening in the mansion, Lena sat at the grand piano one final time. She played a melody that encompassed her entire journey, her struggles, her triumphs, her memories, and her hopes. The music filled every corner of the hall, resonating with emotion. Mr. Harrison stood silently nearby listening, feeling a profound sense of pride and admiration. When the last note faded, Lena looked at him and smiled. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. "For believing in me, for giving me a chance, and for showing me that people can change." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the depth of his emotions. "Thank you, Lena. You reminded me of the power of humility, courage, and heart. I will never forget what you've taught me." As Lena left the mansion the next morning, she carried with her not only her talent and opportunities, but also the lessons of resilience, kindness, and the strength to pursue her dreams. The piano remained in the mansion, a silent witness to the transformation of two lives intertwined by music, respect, and the courage to change. Both Lena and Mr. Harrison knew that life had been forever altered by a single act of bravery and a melody that refused to be silenced. The mansion looked completely different that evening. The chandeliers were glowing, the air was filled with soft laughter, and gentle piano notes echoed from the grand hall as guests began to arrive for the charity event. The place that once felt cold and distant now carried warmth and purpose. Everyone was surprised when they learned the event was not about Mr. Adams's wealth or business success. It was about helping children who dreamed of learning music but could not afford it. And the star of the night was the maid who once worked quietly in the background. Lena stood near the piano, wearing a simple blue dress that one of the housemaids had helped her borrow. She looked nervous but happy. The staff, who had always admired her kindness, gave her encouraging smiles. Even the butler, who rarely showed emotion, told her softly, "You'll do great tonight." Mr. Adams was moving from one group of guests to another, greeting them with a calm smile. For years, people had known him as a proud man who only cared about status. Tonight, however, there was something gentler in his face. When he saw Lena waiting near the piano, he walked over slowly. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, sir. Just a bit nervous." He looked at her for a moment, then said something that surprised her. "Don't call me sir tonight. Just call me Mr. Adams, or maybe friend, if that feels right." Lena's eyes widened slightly. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you." When it was time for her performance, the room fell silent. Mr. Adams walked up to the small stage holding the microphone. His voice was calm but filled with emotion. "Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a short story," he said. He told the crowd how he once believed money defined worth, how he looked down on people who worked for him, thinking they were beneath him. The guests listened carefully, shocked by his honesty. Then he said, "A few months ago, someone here reminded me how wrong I was. She showed me that true talent, true grace, and true strength have nothing to do with wealth. Tonight she will play for you not as a maid but as a remarkable pianist and a dear friend. Please welcome Lena." The room filled with soft applause as Lena walked to the piano. Her heart raced, but when her fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. She began to play a piece she had written herself, a mix of sadness and hope, pain and peace. The music spoke of her journey, losing her dreams, working silently, and finding courage again. Every note carried a story. The guests could feel it. Some closed their eyes. Others watched her hands move with awe. Mr. Adams stood near the stage, his chest heavy with emotion. He remembered the day he had mocked her, how cruelly he had forced her to play in front of strangers. Now that same woman filled his home with beauty. When Lena finished, the last note hung in the air for a long moment. Then came the applause, loud, heartfelt, endless. People stood from their seats, clapping and cheering. Tears glimmered in Lena's eyes, and she bowed deeply. Mr. Adams walked up beside her and took the microphone again. "I owe this woman more than I can ever repay," he said. "She reminded me that we all carry music inside us no matter where we come from. I was blind to that truth, and I'm sorry for it." The room went quiet again. Everyone could see that his words were real. He turned to Lena and said softly, "Thank you for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." After the event, people came up to congratulate her. Some offered her opportunities to perform at small events and studios. A few music teachers even offered to help her get back into her studies. Lena couldn't believe it. It felt like the world had suddenly opened up again after years of being closed. Later that night, after everyone had left, the mansion was quiet once more. Mr. Adams stood by the window, looking out at the garden. He heard the soft sound of the piano behind him. Lena was playing again, this time something light and peaceful. He turned around and listened, not wanting to interrupt. When she stopped, he said, "You've brought life back into this house." Lena smiled. "Music does that. It heals even when we don't understand how." He nodded. "It healed me," he admitted. They talked for a while. He told her about his late wife, how she used to play that same piano every evening. When she passed away, he said, "I stopped listening to music. It hurt too much. But tonight, for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I just felt peace." Lena looked at him kindly. Maybe she would be happy to know her piano still brings peace. Mr. Adams smiled softly. "I think she would." In the weeks that followed, the charity event's success spread through the community. Many people praised Mr. Adams for changing his ways, but he always said, "It wasn't me who changed myself. It was the music and the person who played it." He started funding music scholarships for underprivileged students. He even opened a small community music center where anyone could come and learn, free of charge. Lena became the first instructor there, teaching children the basics of piano and music theory. Watching those little hands press the keys reminded her of her own childhood dreams. Sometimes Mr. Adams would visit the center quietly, standing at the back of the room. The children would laugh and practice, and Lena would guide them with patience. It became a place full of laughter, not pride. One day a small boy asked Lena, "Miss, did someone teach you how to play like this?" She smiled. "Yes, life taught me, and a few kind people who believed in me." Mr. Adams smiled from the doorway, listening. He never interrupted those moments. Months passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. They no longer spoke like employer and maid, but like two people who had walked through pain and come out kinder. Sometimes they would sit together in the evenings, sharing tea and quiet conversation. One evening, Mr. Adams said, "You know, when you played that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope." Lena looked down shyly. "Maybe it was always there. You just needed to hear it again." He chuckled softly. "Maybe you're right." He offered to sponsor her music education fully. "It's not charity," he said. "It's an investment in something pure." She hesitated at first, but after his insistence, she accepted with gratitude. As time went on, Lena became known not just for her talent, but for her humility. People admired how she never forgot where she came from. Even with new opportunities, she continued teaching the children and visiting Mr. Adams regularly. A year later, she was invited to perform at a city concert hall, a big event that gathered musicians from all backgrounds. She almost refused at first, feeling it was too grand for her, but Mr. Adams encouraged her. "This is your moment," he said. "Go and let the world hear your heart." When she walked onto that stage, she remembered everything. The day she was humiliated, the fear she felt, the shame, and the quiet determination that followed. Now, sitting under bright lights, she smiled. As she began to play, She dedicated the piece to everyone who has been judged before being known. Her music filled the hall with warmth, honesty, and emotion. People in the audience felt something more than sound. They felt her story. Mr. Adams watched from the front row, his eyes glistening. For him, it wasn't just pride. It was redemption. The girl he once humiliated had become his greatest teacher. When the performance ended, the crowd stood up, clapping endlessly. Lena bowed deeply, her eyes finding Mr. Adams in the audience. He placed his hand over his heart and nodded. She smiled, tears in her eyes, knowing that both of them had healed in their own ways. Later that night, after the concert, they met backstage. Mr. Adams said, "You've made me believe in music again, but more than that, you made me believe in people again." She replied softly, "You believe too, sir. You just forgot for a while." They both laughed quietly. When they returned to the mansion that night, Lena sat at the same piano where her journey had begun. She started playing gently, and Mr. Adams listened from his chair, eyes closed. The melody carried peace, forgiveness, and a sense of home. The story that started with humiliation had turned into one of respect and kindness. The man who once saw only money now understood the value of a human soul, and the maid who once hid her gift behind fear now shared it with the world. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and the sound of the piano drifted into the night. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of pride now echoed with something far greater: heart, hope, and harmony. And as Lena played, Mr. Adams whispered to himself, This is what real wealth feels like." She smiled, never stopping the music, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt complete.